Hello, this is Helen Mottee, and I want to welcome you to For Eternity.
I put my heart in your hands and you taught me to fly.
Hebrews 13, verses 1 to 3 exhorts us to let brotherly love continue. Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing some have unwittingly entertained angels. Remember the prisoners as if chained with them, those who are mistreated, since you yourselves are in the body also. This week we are going to Egypt, a place that has been almost continually in the news since the events of the Arab Spring in early 2011. But before we do, let's go back in time to AD 202, the place Alexandria in Egypt, where Leonides, the father of Origen, one of the early church fathers, was facing martyrdom for his faith in Jesus Christ. Reading from Jesus Freaks, Revolutionaries. In the previous months, because of the order of Emperor Septimus Severus, the Christians in the surrounding areas were brought into the capital city of Alexandria for their trials. Among them was Leonides, the father of Origen. As he sat in prison, Leonides pined over his family and what would become of them. Had he instilled the faith in them that was needed to persevere in the coming days of difficulty for Christians? Would the emperor's orders quash the faith that was only newly growing in their hearts? What would become of them and their faith once he was gone? It was about this time that he received a letter from his 17-year-old son, Origen. He read it through once, then returned to the words in an opening paragraph to read them again and again. In essence, they said, "Father, be strong in the Lord, and he will help you bravely face the suffering that must definitely await you. Do not grieve for us, your wife and my 6 younger brothers and sisters and myself. None of us could live with ourselves if, for the sake of thinking of us, you should forsake your faithful God and Saviour and miss your eternal reward. If it were up to me, I would be with you, except that Mother prevents me." Leonides clutched the letter to his chest as the tears filled his eyes. He need not worry about his family. Some days later, he was beheaded. Unknown to Leonides, Origen would very likely have joined him in Alexandria had his mother not taken away all of his clothes and left him in his room until he promised to stay with her and his brothers and sisters. But from that day forward, it seems Origen would live his life martyred to Christ's cause. Then, when their father was finally executed, the family lost everything when all of their possessions were confiscated by the emperor. Origen went on to become a noted historian and teacher in the early church, many of his writings still being used today in the discussion of philosophy and correct biblical doctrine. If there were Christians in danger in the area, Origen would be there. He would be there at their trials and encourage them to hold on to Jesus no matter what. He would minister to them in prison, and he would even walk with them to their executions and bid them farewell, telling them he hoped to be along shortly. In the coming years, he saw many of his brothers and sisters in Christ die for their faith, and then eventually many of his own disciples he had brought to the Lord and instructed in the truth. Somehow through all of this, Origen walked with a supernatural protection that brought him through several close calls, ambushes, and attempts to capture him. In the end, when he was about 64, in the midst of Emperor Decius's edict renewing Christian persecution in the empire, Origen was captured and cruelly tortured for his faith. He was cast into a dark pit they called a prison and had his neck weighed down with chains and his feet locked in stocks that spread out his legs 4 spaces so that they were constantly stretched in agony. He was poked with burning prods and tortured in various other ways, yet always he endured these with grace and patience. His torturers saw no reason for his execution, though, so they continued his torture indefinitely. When Gallus became emperor at Decius's death, he forgot the Christians for a while in the wake of the war he was fighting in the north with the Goths. During this time, Origen was banished to Caesarea Statonis and then finally moved to Tyre, where he died a natural death at the age of 69. We have heard much about the Arab Spring over the past 4 years, but what exactly was it? Sourcewatch.org states that, quote, Arab Spring refers to the democratic uprisings that arose independently and spread across the Arab world in 2011. The movement originated in Tunisia in December 2010 and quickly took hold in Egypt, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia and Jordan. The term was previously used beginning in March 2005 by numerous media commentators to suggest that a spin-off benefit of the invasion of Iraq would be the flowering of Western-friendly Middle East democracies. End quote. MiddleEast.about.com adds, the term Arab Spring was popularized by the Western media in early 2011 when the successful uprising in Tunisia against former leader Zine El Abidine Ben Ali emboldened similar anti-government protests in most Arab countries. The term was a reference to the turmoil in Eastern Europe in 1989 when seemingly impregnable communist regimes began falling down under pressure from mass popular protests in a domino effect. In a short period of time, most countries in the former communist bloc adopted democratic political systems with a market economy. But the events in the Middle East went in a less straightforward direction. Egypt, Tunisia and Yemen entered an uncertain transition period. Syria and Libya were drawn into a civil conflict, while the wealthy monarchies in the Persian Gulf remained largely unshaken by the events. The use of the term the Arab Spring has since been criticised for being inaccurate and simplistic. Continuing, we read, the protest movement of 2011 was at its core an expression of deep-seated resentment at the aging Arab dictatorships, some glossed over with rigged elections, anger at the brutality of the security apparatus, unemployment, rising prices, and corruption that followed the privatisation of state assets in some countries. But unlike the communist Eastern Europe in 1989, there was no consensus on the political and economic model that existing systems should be replaced with. People in republican regimes like Egypt and Tunisia wanted to overthrow the president, but other than free elections, they had little idea on what to do next. And beyond calls for greater social justice, there was no magic wand for the economy. Leftist groups and unions wanted higher wages and a reversal of dodgy privatisation deals. Others wanted liberal reforms to make more room for the private sector. Some hardline Islamists were more concerned with enforcing strict religious norms. All political parties promised more jobs, but none came close to developing a program with concrete economic policies. So if you are a Christian believer living in Egypt today, what is your life like? How has your life been affected by an event like the Arab Spring and the subsequent civil unrest and increasing intolerance towards minority faiths?
It is getting difficult to reach the unreached.
Muslim believe you don't have the right to be a Christian.
A convert can be killed and nobody will ask who is killer.
The apostles came to Egypt and spread Christianity, and we want to be like them.
My prayer is for the church in Egypt to wake up, to rise up.
Egypt, one of the world's greatest civilizations, the land of the pharaohs, the birthplace of Moses, the land God used to save his people from starvation through Joseph. A place of refuge for the Christ child, visited by the disciples Mark and Peter and the Apostle Paul, one of the first nations to embrace Christianity. But 13 centuries ago, Islam changed all that. Today, Islam is the official religion of Egypt. And while the Constitution provides freedom of belief and religious practices, it is Sharia, Islamic law, that is the primary source of legislation. The government is rarely responsible for religious persecution, but the culture is often responsible for oppression of Christians.
Reading from Open Doors webpage. In recent years, Christians in Egypt, not only Christian converts from a Muslim background, but also the large indigenous Coptic community have come increasingly under pressure. Former President Morsi's failure to adequately address the country's economic challenges was the main trigger for the massive protests in July 2013, which led to his ousting by the military, backed by the majority of the Egyptians. Shortly after the overthrow of Morsi, there was an upsurge in sectarian violence towards Coptic Christians. During the 2015 World Watch List reporting period, 65 churches, Christian bookshops, Christian schools and convents were completely burned down, destroyed or looted by mobs who are often encouraged by radical Islamic movements. In the case of Christian converts from a Muslim background, their family members are often the source of persecution. Muslim background believers, or MBBs, face severe limitations within their homes and extended families. Family members might punish converts to Christianity for abandoning the Islamic faith. In recent years, things have changed, causing the historical Christian communities to be targeted as well. As radical Islam is fervently trying to take over the country's culture, there is a growing response to reject Christianity. Voice of the Martyrs, Canada, writes, Egypt had a majority Christian population for 1,000 years before Islam became the dominant religion. In May 2012 elections, the Islamist Muslim Brotherhood Party gained control of both the legislature and the presidency. As the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood grew, killings, church attacks and abductions of women also increased. However, on July 3, 2013, the elected president, Mohamed Morsi, who was backed by the Muslim Brotherhood, was removed from power by the Egyptian military after millions of protesters took to the streets. Egypt has been designated a country of particular concern by the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. Sharia law became the principal source of legislation in 1980. With persecution of Christians most prevalent in Upper Egypt. Since Egypt's revolution in 2011, nearly 100 Coptic Christians have been killed, more than in the previous 10 years combined. In February 2013, Christian groups came together to form an Egyptian Council of Churches. Radical Muslims, angered by Morsi's removal, have retaliated against Egyptian Christians, killing a priest and others. They have painted marks on Christian-owned businesses to indicate potential targets during attacks, and they have warned people not to purchase from Christians. Many Christian shop owners have been forced to close their shops, and Christian women and girls have been forced to stay inside to prevent being attacked or kidnapped.
Սիրով ինձ այցելել ես, պրգությունն ես բարգևել, քո կրգում կդել եմ ես խաղաղություն, և ամեն բանի համար շնորհակալ եմ անսահման, նվիրում եմ ես իմ սիրտը միայն քեզ, երգում եմ Jesus, երգում եմ շնորհակալություն, 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 Հիսուս, Im poharemes tu zove Hachima hoves matze Kozohovins barke veles Bianca vidiam Imagarovem ko ariam Ko archev kal hamartsak Yev garovem nayel ughir Ko achkerin Yerkumem parkes Parkes Isus Parkes meracha Isus
Reading from the webpage of Deutsche Welle, Germany's international broadcaster. This article was posted September 2013. Anti-Christian violence is on the rise in Egypt. Just a month ago, 45 churches and buildings were burned to the ground. But will Egyptian security forces do anything to stop it? Charred benches, notebooks covered in ash, the burnt-out shell of a school bus. The Franciscan school in the upper Egyptian city of Beni Suef looks like the aftermath of a bomb attack. Toilets and sinks are shattered into fragments. The melted blades of fans hang from the ceiling. Bedecked in white, Sister Nagat sits beside the wreckage of an altar in a room with blackened walls. Christian services can no longer be held here. The attackers took stools, sacred images, even light switches and cables. They burned the cross on top of the building and raised the flag of Al-Qaeda in its place. The Islamists wreaked havoc for 8 hours, says Nagat. 1 month after the most intense religious unrest in Egypt since the revolution of January 25, 2011, the country's Christian communities remain in shock. At least 45 churches and many other Christian facilities went up in flames on August 14th. The fiercest violence raged in Upper Egypt, where the number of Christians is particularly high. The attacks are thought to be in retaliation for the Egyptian army's massacre of hundreds of Islamists at a Cairo protest, when the Muslim Brotherhood accused Christians of supporting the military. Egyptian Christians have seen themselves as the victims of discrimination for decades, professionally and in day-to-day life, but in the past few months the number of violent attacks against them has risen markedly. Nagat blames the fallen Islamist government of President Mohamed Morsi. President Hosni Mubarak put the preachers of hate behind bars, she told Deutsche Welle. Under Morsi, though, they were allowed to agitate in the mosques as much as they wanted to. Thus, she says, the imams called for the boycott of Coptic stores in Beni Suef. Security forces have arrested more than 2,000 Morsi supporters since August 14, yet the situation has improved little for Christians. In Dalga, a small city in the upper Egyptian province of El Minya, Islamists recently called for the establishment of Sharia law, and 40 Christian families fled the area after arsonists torched their homes. Meanwhile, Christians remaining in Dalga have to pay protection money to Islamists. In Beni Suef, members of the Muslim Brotherhood march nearly every evening through the city centre, threatening further attacks, says Amir Saimi, a doctor at St. Teresa Hospital. Yet police have not complied with requests to place guards in front of the Christian hospital there. Saimi isn't angry, though. The police can hardly protect themselves, he told Deutsche Welle. On the same day the Franciscan school went up in flames, Islamists also set fire to a central police station. Samey has treated a number of policemen with bullet wounds. For one of the officers, help came too late. He was a 22-year-old Christian and a friend of the doctor's. Coptic Christians in Egypt placed their hopes in the army, even though the military killed Christian demonstrators in Cairo little more than 2 years ago. Last month, Defence Minister Abdel Fattah el-Sisi promised Christians that the army would pay for the restoration of destroyed churches. But little has happened so far. No one from the government has even seen the damage, says Sarif Nasser, a hairdresser from a small town founded by Christians just south of Beni Suef. One local church is now nothing but burnt-out ruins, and the resident priest has fled. Hatred towards Christians has been around for a long time, he told Deutsche Welle, but only since Morsi have they been acting on it. Nasser was able to identify many of the attackers as members of the Muslim Brotherhood, while others, he says, were paid accomplices. The police initially arrested some of them, but they escaped the next day when a group of Islamists set the police station on fire. In Beni Suef, processing the crimes is a sluggish business. The Franciscan school sent discs to authorities with photos and videos of the attacks recorded by neighbours. Dozens of plunderers can be seen in them, some laughing joyfully at the cameras. But local Christians say that few people have been arrested despite this evidence. Sister Nagat is also disappointed by the lack of help from the local community. For her, that is the most difficult thing to understand, since 2/3 of her 600 students are Muslim. Some Muslims in neighbouring areas have expressed regret at the fire, she says, but when it comes to rebuilding the church, no one wants to help. Let's listen to an August 2013 Human Rights Watch report.
On August 14th, after police and security forces moved to break up the sit-ins in Cairo, there were simultaneous church attacks that took place throughout the country. In most of these attacks that we've documented, hundreds of men came armed with guns in some cases, Molotov cocktails, sticks. They broke in, they came in, they looted, they destroyed, and then for many of the churches, they burned them to the ground. Muslim Brotherhood activists and other Islamists have insinuated a direct link between Coptic activism and the removal of former President Morsi in early July. The mobs who attacked churches, they also attacked Coptic-owned businesses, religious institutions such as the Jesuit Center in Minya, schools, they attacked the orphanage in Minya. At 3 p.m. Approximately on Wednesday, this boat, which is actually a tourist restaurant, was attacked by a group of people. There were 2 employees present when the boat was attacked, and they hid here in this bathroom. And unfortunately, both of them died. One, his name was Bishoy, he was a Christian, and the other, Ihab, was Muslim. And you can still see their shoes and mobile here. In the vast majority of the cases of attacks on churches that Human Rights Watch documented, security forces were not present at the start of the attack and didn't come to the aid of the churches during the attack. In Minya City, one young man whose church was burned pointed across the street very close to the location of the church, saying, that's the security building. So he couldn't understand why the police and the security forces didn't come. At the Jesuit Center in Minya City, one of the priests, one of the Jesuit brothers, ran himself to the police station and pleaded with the officer there to come and help. The officer told him that his orders were only to protect the police station.
They said, we have enough problem, we cannot come to rescue you, we just helpless. They kept on telling. Some were getting angry also when we were calling them out. So it was like that.
Has any police officer come here since Wednesday?
No, not a single.
What happened?
Not a single.
When churches came under attack, police stations and security force facilities were attacked simultaneously. The head of the police in Minya told Human Rights Watch in a meeting on August 20th that he was unable, that his forces were completely unable to respond because they were dealing with sieges themselves. Residents, activists, and clergy in all of these places Human Rights Watch have visited have indicated that the locations of the churches and the religious institutions are still unsecure, and they worry about more attacks. The Egyptian government should immediately move to protect these areas, which are still targeted. It should also move to investigate the events of August 14th and the looting and the burning. It should identify the perpetrators and bring them to justice.
Reading from Open Doors webpage, an article headed, Egypt, Knife Attack Kills Christian Woman, posted February 2014. An Egyptian pharmacist has been arrested in connection with the stabbing death of a Christian woman earlier this month. In a country where anti-Christian violence is a daily occurrence, the death of Madeleine Wagi on February 8th was not widely reported. It received brief mention in one of the more lurid corners of Egyptian online news. It was one act of violence among the many that have followed the military's removal of former President Mohamed Morsi last summer. Since August's deadly clashes between pro-Morsi demonstrators and army, scores of churches have been ransacked. Kidnappings have become epidemic. Christian doctors and pharmacists are favoured targets. Christians generally are seen as having access to money and for being supporters of the military takeover that drove the Muslim Brotherhood underground. Though the military-run interim government has outlawed the Brotherhood and rounded up its leaders, Egypt's Christian leaders complain security forces do not show the same determination to track down the arsonists, kidnappers and killers who have lashed out at Christians and their churches. In the case of Madeleine Wagi's death, the man in custody, Mahmoud Muhammad Ali Hamid, appears to be preparing to plead insanity. Where Christian victims are concerned, that too is common. On the evening of February 8, Wagi was working alone in Mahaba Pharmacy in Kom Ombo, a Nile River city of about 60,000 people in southern Egypt. Famous for its ancient temple ruins and about 270 kilometres north of the Sudan border. The pharmacy is owned by Semen Forwi Eskander, a Christian. A man charged into the shop, brandishing a pocket knife. He stabbed Wagi in the throat, severing an artery. She bled to death quickly, said Reverend Raphael Risk, a Coptic Orthodox priest in Kom Ombo. Madeleine Wagi was 35. Outside, passing by the pharmacy, was Marian Kamal Shafiq. The attacker burst out of the pharmacy and stabbed the 18-year-old in her back near her shoulder. He yelled, "You Christians deserve more than that," then jumped into a waiting car and sped away, Risk told World Watch Monitor. He said Shafiq was treated at the Kom Ombo hospital and released. Mahaba Pharmacy was the second target of the evening. Only minutes before, a few hundred metres up the street, the same attacker had entered another pharmacy also owned by a Christian, Michael Abadir. This time, however, there were several employees on duty as well as neighbours who rushed to their aid, and they were able to turn the man with the knife back out into the street and into his waiting car, Risk said. The funeral for Wagi was held the next evening, February 9th, at Mar Gerges Church in Kom Ombo. There was a march of the Muslim Brotherhood passing in front of the church, Risk said, and they were chanting slogans against Christians, threatening Christians, and they were saying, "We are going to kill you, O Christians," and "This is the beginning." And then the security forces came and dispersed them. At the same time, other Kom Ombo Muslims attended the funeral and denounced the violence, according to a priest quoted by Mideast Christian News. Police arrested Hamid within a few hours after Wagi was killed. Hamid, 31, himself a pharmacist and a representative of a pharmaceutical company to medical clients, is related to Mohammed El Omda, a former Muslim Brotherhood Member of Parliament now imprisoned in connection with deadly street violence following Morsi's removal. Hamid's father is El Omda's cousin, Risk told World Watch Monitor. Though Hamid is licensed to dispense medicine, Risk said Hamid's lawyers are preparing an insanity defence. The lawyers of this assailant declared to the Kom Ombo prosecution that Mohammed is mentally ill, to acquit him of this crime, Risk said. It is an audacious argument to make, he said, given that Hamid is subject to licensing and review by the government in order to work as a pharmacist. But pleading mental incompetence is a tactic often employed when accused of crimes against Coptic Christians. Why are perpetrators of crimes against Copts always mentally ill? Mid-East Christian News quoted a Mar Gerges priest it identified as Reverend Philopatia. Yes, a good question, isn't it? But not only applicable to horrific crimes committed in countries like Egypt. Pleading insanity seems to be an increasingly useful option in our Australian courts as well. Christian believers face another insidious and terrifying threat at this time, the kidnapping and/or trafficking of their young daughters by Islamic militants. Here is a report by Gary Lane, posted July 2013.
One of the challenges facing Christian families here, particularly in Upper Egypt, is the kidnapping of young Christian girls. It generally happens when the girls enter their teen years. So what are families to do about this? Some move away to Christian villages, relocating. But with that comes a whole new set of challenges.
Manel moved her family from a Muslim village to a Christian one near Almenia. She wanted to protect her oldest daughter, Mariam, from abduction and forced conversion. She made the decision after noticing some Muslim girls and boys attempting to lure Mariam away from her family and faith.
The girls used to tell Mariam, "Come with us, we will give you some money. You are having a hard life." The young boys were sending the young girls to do this. I feared they would kidnap her and then demand a lot of money to return her, or they would return her and she wouldn't be in the same way as they took her.
Now, residing as strangers in a new town, her husband has difficulty finding work.
I am much happier now because it's safe for my daughters here, but the working opportunities for my husband are little because few people know my husband.
Miriam's family borrowed money to buy food and make their house payment. They prayed God would provide help. She and her family are not alone. Last year, a Helsinki Commission hearing revealed the number of disappearances and abduction of Christian girls is increasing. Human trafficking expert Michelle Clark told of more than 800 cases. Still, many Islamic leaders and government officials debunk claims that Christian girls are being trafficked. They insist the conversions and marriages are not forced. They're simply the result of amorous love between young people of different faiths. Helmi El-Sayed is Freedom and Justice Party Secretary for Giza.
A boy and a girl from different religions love each other, and thus one of them converts his religion in order to get married. The problem is that families do not accept that. Also, the two religions, neither the church accepts any of its people to Islam because of love, nor Islam accepts this type of conversion.
Sayed claims it's a social problem that must be addressed, not a religious one. Earlier this year, the Coptic Orthodox Patriarch told me that efforts to prevent trafficking and forced conversions often fail.
This is a very sensitive issue for us. We try with the government, with the local authorities. Sometimes we success, but sometimes no success.
The Morsi government did little to curtail the trafficking. Political change gives many Egyptian Christians hope. They pray the next government will force police to treat Christian kidnapping complaints seriously. They also want to see the government prosecute the kidnappers. As for Mariam and her family, their prayers for help were answered. CBN provided them with the seed money needed to start a small clothing business.
My daughters and I will tell people in the church that we sell new clothing and the profits we get will help buy clothes for my children and feed my family. May the American Christians who help us have a long life, and may God be with them to help others like me to become self-supporting.
Help that brings a glimmer of hope and a new beginning in Egypt.
And Gary Lane joins us now. Gary, Mubarak, for Christians under Mubarak was tough, but it's tougher.
Well, it is tougher. On the same day that Father Mina was assassinated, July 6th, there was a Christian businessman that was kidnapped in northern Sinai. He was found dead, his severed head from his body, less than a week later. Christians now are leaving the northern Sinai. They're leaving that area.
And primarily it's because the Christians overwhelmingly supported Morsi's removal? Is that why? It's like a backlash?
Well, they did, and the Muslims, extremists, as I had pointed out, are attacking the Christians. In the southern part of the country, in the upper Egypt, Christians aren't even going out in the streets. They're closing their businesses, and the businesses, we have a photo of that I'd like to show you, are being marked. The ones for Christians have a red X on them. That's reminiscent of the Holocaust and the Jews. This is what Islamist extremists are doing.
What is the military doing to protect the Christians?
Well, the military says they're there only to protect federal institutions. So the Christians are basically on their own. They're getting a little support, but not much.
What do they hope for the future in terms of, their life real quickly?
Yeah, more participation in the government. Already we've seen 2 Christians appointed to the cabinet in the interim government, and they would like to see more freedom of religion there.
In 2009, Greg Musselman of Voice of the Martyrs Canada interviewed Mohammed Hegazi, a Muslim convert to Christianity, in Cairo when he was in hiding. Here is an insight into what a Muslim background believer faces when he turns to Christ.
Dr. Abdul adds that some high-profile cases of believers from Islamic backgrounds wanting to officially change their religion is drawing international attention. One such case is that of Mohammed Hegazi, who is in hiding along with his wife and daughter. Hegazi took the unprecedented step of going to court to change his religion from Islam to Christianity on his national ID card. The story was leaked to the press and led to a firestorm of controversy that seemed to reach every major Arabic-speaking television station.
Anyone who becomes a Christian must be mentally ill.
Muhammad's highly publicized trial went to court, but the judge refused to acknowledge his right to change his religion to Christianity. If Muhammad goes against the court, he could face 3 to 10 years in prison and a hefty fine. Muhammad and his then pregnant wife Christina began running from the law. A month later, baby Miriam was born while they were in hiding. Christina's family and friends have threatened to kill her because she married a convert to Christianity.
I love my parents so much. I want them to know that I'm praying that the Lord will open their hearts and minds, that He would show them the way, and that they would get the same blessings that I'm getting.
Muhammad's family was just as angry. In an interview with the local newspapers, Muhammad's father said, "I'm going to try to talk to my son and convince him to return to Islam. If he refuses, I'm going to kill him with my own hands." Shortly afterward, Muhammad released this response.
I would like to send a message to my dad. I saw what you said in the newspaper. You say you want to kill me, to shed my blood in public. But I love you so much because you are my dad and because Jesus taught me to love. I accepted Jesus Christ willingly. Nobody forced me. I forgive you. No matter what decision you make, no matter what you do, to my dad and mom, I say Jesus Christ died to save me.
Muhammad and his family were supported through the Voice of the Martyrs Canada in partnership with Christians in Egypt through a Safe House program, which provides shelter and safety to believers from Muslim backgrounds. Muhammad became a follower of Jesus over 10 years ago when he was 16. Muhammad's new faith in Jesus was tested early and often. State security was called in by his father, and Muhammad was arrested and questioned by a very aggressive officer.
His questions were about who helped me to embrace Christianity, and he wanted to know names of the people. But I told him my testimony about how I listened to the Christian radio station and that nobody helped me to become a Christian. So he spent 3 days torturing me in a very serious way, a very rough way. He was beating me, he was whipping me, he was putting his shoes into my face.
Muhammad says there is a specialized office in the state security against Christian evangelism.
All the officers in that office are really fanatic about their Islam, really religious. They're very tough and severe against the Muslim converts to Christianity and the Christians. This officer was praying and taking more energy to torture me. Others also beat me. They put a blindfold over my eyes so I couldn't see where I was and where I was about to be beaten. I couldn't understand my crime, why they were doing that to me, just because I was a Christian. After 3 days, the officer brought in a Muslim scholar who tried to convince me to return to Islam. I told him I didn't need anyone to convince me because I was a Christian.
Despite death threats, torture, and imprisonment, Muhammad has stayed true to Christ.
I've been arrested dozens of times. I can't remember how many times. A few days each time, once for 2 months. Sometimes they would torture me, and sometimes they wouldn't even ask me questions.
Muhammad has been surprised by the major uproar his case has caused.
I've spent years being treated as a criminal, and I don't know what my crime is. I just want to live as a normal Christian, worshiping God, going to the church without that kind of persecution I'm facing every day. At that time, my wife was pregnant. We don't want our child to live as a Christian at home and a Muslim at school with his friends. Since we filed the case, all the local press wrote about it. But they were against me. They wrote against my reputation. Many Muslim scholars issued the fatwa saying I must be killed. On television, people were saying if they meet me on the streets, they'll kill me. Many fatwas have come up saying I must be killed.
Muhammad says God has protected him and his family many times.
Like, for example, we had rented an apartment, but we moved out the day before the fanatical Muslims came and burned the apartment, and then burned all our furniture in the streets in front of everybody. Another time, the building where we were living was surrounded by fanatical Muslims for a month and a half. Later, they killed a Christian nun who had helped my wife. They burned her.
It may be many years before Muhammad and his family are officially recognized as Christians, but he says he's prepared to wait and pray. In the meantime, he will continue to spread the gospel and serve the Lord in whatever way he can.
6 years later, Morning Star News and Christian Solidarity Worldwide bring us this update, posted January 15th, 2015. We read, "A convert to Christianity who was sentenced to 5 years in prison for documenting attacks on believers has won a partial victory on appeal, but must remain in jail because of prior blasphemy charges." On December 28th, an appeals judge found 31-year-old Bishoy Armia Boulos, previously known as Muhammad Hagassi, not guilty on a charge of spreading information meant to, quote, cause harm or damage to the public interest, unquote, and not guilty on the closely related charge of spreading false news, quote, bound to weaken, unquote, Egypt's prestige or harm the, quote, country's national interests, unquote. Bishoy, however, was found guilty of an unidentified charge, likely that of inciting sectarian strife, and sentenced to 1 year in prison. Since Bishoy has already spent more than a year in prison while waiting for his trial and appeal to take place, technically he should have been granted release at the conclusion of the recent hearing. Instead, Bishoy has been held without an opportunity to post bail because of the blasphemy charges filed against him 5 years ago by 2 Islamist lawyers. His attorneys believe the state, in effect, has taken an active role in punishing Bishoy for his conversion by holding him on charges past their statutory limit and, as mentioned, doing so without any possibility of bail. Sources have also reported that Bishoy has endured abuse while imprisoned, including verbal and physical assaults and times of solitary confinement. Despite this disappointing news, please pray that Bishoy will remain confident in his Saviour and Lord, knowing that true freedom is only found in him. Yet, as he serves this remaining sentence, let us continue praying for his physical freedom from prison so that he may very soon be allowed to return home to his struggling wife and young children. Please intercede on behalf of those who have brought all these charges against Bishoy, as well as the guards abusing him, that they may also come to know Jesus Christ as their Redeemer. Release International posted this report June 4th, 2015. It has recently been reported that Bishoy Armia Boulos, formerly known as Muhammad Hagassi, is now enduring an overextended prison sentence with frequent assault. According to Bishoy's present lawyer, Karam Gabriel, jailers at Torah prison have been beating Bishoy several times a week and ruthlessly dragging him across a concrete floor. These jailers have been humiliating Bishoy in an apparent attempt to pressure him to renounce his faith. When authorities were initially informed that Bishoy was trying to document Christian persecution, he was sentenced to imprisonment for, quote, spreading false information, unquote, intended to harm the public interest. While his 1-year sentence for this charge had expired in December, he still remains in detention. Bishoy is also awaiting trial for a blasphemy charge in connection with his attempt to change the religious status of his ID card to Christian. His lawyer has filed a formal complaint about Bishoy's mistreatment and ongoing detention to Egypt's Attorney General, Hasham Barakat. As we conclude this edition of For Eternity, I want to share with you 2 extraordinary stories from inside Egypt which have poignantly shown the world how true followers of Christ respond to their persecutors. Wazala.org reports, less than 2 years after its democratic revolution, Egypt is in crisis, its people more divided than ever. After a series of mass rallies by opposition groups and government supporters filled the streets of Cairo and other cities, some attended by Christians, some 12,000 believers gathered in prayer for the nation on Thursday, 13th of December in Cairo's expansive cave church at Mokattam. 1 year before, on 11th of November 2011, an unprecedented night of prayer drew 70,000 Christians from all streams of the Egyptian church to pray for their nation. On 13th of December 2012, thousands of believers from across Egypt's churches, Orthodox, Protestant and Catholic, gathered again. This time they prayed, not for presidential elections, but for the current crisis situation. They also prayed for church unity, repentance and spiritual revival in Egypt. At times the people erupted into chants of Jesus and Egypt, showing their love for Christ and commitment to their country. Held aloft among the ocean of worshippers, banners declared messages like, "We want you, Jesus," and "You turned my mourning into dancing. You replaced my sackcloth with a garment of praise." Asked why this prayer night was happening, SAT7 Egypt Executive Director Farid Garis answers, "Because it's the best and only thing we could do right now amongst everything that's happening." The 11-11-11 event was watched on television by millions around the Middle East and sent a powerful message of the concern and love of Egypt's Christians, Orthodox, Protestant and Catholic, for their country. The December 2012 event is doing the same. From the event, many posted their responses on social media. One said, "My mum, my wife, my daughter and a friend are now at the cave church, standing before the Lord, praying for our country among thousands of other Christians. Not a single harassment incident was reported and not one single bad word said against other religion." A Muslim attendee posted, "To all those who keep saying that Christians are mobilizing the crowds against Egypt's interest, I'd like to tell you that yes, they're mobilizing a huge crowd right now in the cave church. There are nothing but songs, Egypt's flags and prayers for Egypt and for its good. To all the Christians in Egypt, your raised hands and prayers are what is making Egypt go on until now." I wonder what would happen if Christians in Australia gathered in a similar way, forgetting denominational peripherals, to simply come before the Lord in repentance and faith to pray for our country, because as Farid Garis said, it's the best and only thing we can do right now. And finally, Open Doors posted this report, February 2015. We read, "After Islamic State militants executed 21 Egyptian Christians in Libya last week, the incredible story we're hearing from the Egyptian church is one of grace and forgiveness." One of our field workers in Egypt says, "The sound of prayers requesting mercy and life, not revenge and destruction, calling on God's name to come and change the hearts of the killers, is loudly heard across Egypt." Incredibly, prayers like these have been answered before. A pastor in Cairo told us, "Last week I had the privilege of meeting with 2 former terrorists who got involved directly in killing Christians for their faith. The Lord changed their hearts and they are now preaching the gospel and serving the Lord." One field worker says, "Some of the heartbroken wives, mothers, fathers and children of the martyrs were recently interviewed in national and private-run TV talk shows about what they are going through. Their simple expressions of love and forgiveness brought down so many tears on air and surely delivered a mind-blowing message about what the Christian faith is all about. No more direct testimony about God's love could have been communicated publicly as those few words that were uttered by the family members of those 21 martyrs." Egyptian pastors are calling their congregations to wake up and pray for the persecutors of the church to come to meet with the Saviour. We pray that God will remove their stone hearts and gives them hearts of flesh and blood capable of loving. We, Christians of Egypt, believe that the prayers and intercession of the Egyptian church were heard by the Almighty and that our country has been protected from chaos and past threats. We therefore realize how we should continue to stand in the gap for our country and the entire troubled region of the Arab world. Please join the church in Egypt in prayer. This is Helen Mottee for eternity.
For eternity. For eternity.
For Eternity is produced in the studios of Rima FM Port Macquarie.